There's a not so hidden part of travel that really makes a lot of sense. And I want to address it on this week's edition of Travel Evolved, and that is RVing as a traveler. A lot of people have tried it. A lot of people have done it really successfully. If you've thought about it ever, or if you're doing it now, I want you to listen to this episode because we're going to talk about RVing as a traveler and all the phenomenal benefits that I personally believe come along with it on this week's edition of Travel Evolved. Welcome to Travel Evolved, everyone. I am Mark Holloway. Really excited. I mean, I shouldn't say really excited. I like this episode. This is an important one. I am excited about it, but I don't want to say really excited every time because then you're going to think, this guy's always excited about everything, and it's a bunch of baloney. So we got to be careful of how much excitement I put into an episode. I do like this episode. I think this is one of those, hidden nuances to being a traveler that a lot of people don't think about. Maybe a lot of people are intimidated by. I don't know if that's for me. I have talked to a lot of travelers that do RV or do kind of work, basically live out of their mobile transportation / housing. And for many of them, it is a really, really awesome fit and one that just makes sense across the board. And I want to talk to you guys about that today. As always, I want to thank you guys for the subscriptions. I want to thank everyone for joining Travel Evolve, the Facebook group. We're starting to put some really good things on there that I think are going to be helpful that you're just not going to find on a lot of other, platforms, a lot of other Facebook groups that are going to really help you guys to become better travelers instantly. I know that we put the GSA link right up there. Some calculators are coming up, which is I think going to be one of the biggest things you're never going to see from anybody, and that is some really rudimentary, almost basic calculators that will kind of explain how it is that agencies calculate how much they're going to pay you based upon the bill rate and based upon their own particular goal of what kind of margin that they feel they need to make out of each individual bill rate. Sorry, I'm just trying to get my phone to stop there. So that's part of it, is having a web page or a Facebook group is fun if you want to sit there and talk and promote, whatever it is we're doing and promote this show. But it's important that you have some good benefits, and that's what we're doing on Travel Evolve. So if you haven't yet, or if you please know somebody that you think might benefit from getting some of this fundamental information that you're just not going to get anywhere else, especially something like that, then please direct them to Travel Evolved on the Facebook page. You can find it pretty simply. I think My Ugly Mug's up on that. I think it's the same one that we use for this podcast and this YouTube channel. So find us, ask to join. We're going to let you in and participate. Start throwing some wild stuff out there. We like it when people ask us some questions, and even if it may take me a couple of hours to get to it, depends on what's going on in my day, I will answer it the best I can. I'll answer right there publicly on the Facebook group. If I don't know, I'm going to tell you that too. I don't know. And maybe somebody else would be able to chime in with an answer. But fire away this stuff. Again, you guys have an opportunity to, I think, ask some questions that you guys know from me. It's not going to be, there's going to be no mirrors and smoke and mirrors on. It's going to be, here's the answer. I have nothing to lose except for to tell you guys exactly what's going on and, how to become a better traveler. And I think this is one of those episodes. So let's get into it. I think RVing, first and foremost, is an amazing opportunity to save some money. And yes and no. I mean, you are basically taking what would be a housing stipend, and rather than giving it to somebody else through Airbnb or an apartment community or a corporation, you're basically paying your lease or your payment down. which makes sense provided you do some things the right way. It's just a good opportunity. I mean, you're taking what is given to you, even if you own a home, having this second property that hopefully you're taking care of. I mean, I understand there's some depreciation that's going to go on, and that's why I'll tell you that, I'll just say it right now. I think used is the best way to go on this stuff, but not always. If you buy something like that and it doesn't have a huge chunk of depreciation falling off it from the get-go, then you're in pretty good shape to be able to use this thing, pay it down, have it, and be able to turn around and sell it maybe when you're done traveling, or when perhaps you're tired of it and you haven't thrown away all that stipend that these agencies are giving you. It's a great way to put some money in your pocket. There's a whole bunch of other perks I like about it, but I think a lot of folks tend to be somewhat intimidated by the idea. If you haven't RV'd before, it can feel like, and it is, trust me, the more sophisticated the RV, the more problems you can have. And ask anybody out there that has one, or has traveled in one, or is doing this as a traveling healthcare professional. You guys know that oftentimes the more expensive and the more luxurious the RV is, it's got more bells and whistles, which means more things can go wrong. And these things do have things that go wrong. I don't care if it's an awning that has a glitch that you're having trouble and you got to get it fixed, or the wind bends it a little bit and you've got to get that fixed before you put it on the road. There are major expenses that go along with this. But I do think the average person sometimes can be like, if you have an RV, they're going to say, well, I don't know much about that. I don't want to get over my head, because it seems like it can be complicated, and it can be. There are certain things and rules, like anything else, you've got to learn the tricks of the trade. However, there's plenty of resources to learn how to RV well and properly and get the most out of it. Literally, and I'll say this again toward the end of the podcast, there are Facebook groups for healthcare travelers specifically designed about RVing. And I think it's an amazingly good source, especially for multiple ones, to be able to ask some questions. A lot of travelers, especially when it comes to their passion for being an RVer, are really happy to give you their input and help you, kind of like with this podcast, to maybe get to that learning curve faster of being an RVer, if that's a word, and learning how to do it well and not making the mistakes, which oftentimes can be financially devastating, that maybe they've made. And so there's a lot of really good people out there that are doing their best to help educate travelers. I love it. I mean, if you're, just off a side note, if you're RVing and you're in a facility that happens to have an RV park relatively close by it, the chances of bumping into another person that has a lot in common with you that's also traveling as a healthcare professional tend to be pretty high. And I think there's that right there. From the get-go, you've got some camaraderie, and you guys are both not only traveling, but you're living this RV lifestyle at the same time. So there's an instant connection and an opportunity to be able to hang out and have some fun with some folks that are maybe staying in the same park or same area that you are. So don't be intimidated by it. If it's something that you think you want to do after listening to this, or just even kind of kicking the tires, so to speak, you can research this stuff and you can learn a lot really quickly. And my recommendation, honestly, would be to start off small. I wouldn't go gangbusters and spend a huge amount of money and get the best of the best. I would kind of dabble in it and see if it's something you like. Take something that is small that you think you can turn around and maybe sell again, and try something small first and then see how that fits and works with you. So basically, what RVing can oftentimes do, look at it this way. Yes, you're how do we say it? Are we going to say that you're saving money? Let's just say that the money that you'd be giving to somebody else, like I said a few minutes ago, is now going into your own purchase of an investment. Now, how that investment performs over the course of time is going to be a lot up to what you buy, how it wears, how it it keeps up with the test of time, which has a lot to do with how you use it and how you abuse it too. So you've got to be careful, but it is an opportunity for you to basically start to have your travel purchase an investment. A lot of folks say this, I've got two mortgages. I've got basically my home mortgage, and staff professionals understand that when they see this money that we're getting for our housing statement, they think we're keeping that. They don't always understand this is going toward rent of for an Airbnb or whatnot. When you have a RV, the rent is actually now going toward your payment. And if you've done it right, hopefully, especially with the way things are right now, you ought to be able to not only make your payment, but have a couple bucks left over. Now, I'm always going to tell you guys, please talk to your CPA. And if I haven't said this before, and you haven't heard me, if this is your first episode you listen to, I would urge all of you to make sure you're using a CPA, not just an accountant or somebody that you go see once a year that pops up in a strip mall that has got a Statue of Liberty person out there, waving you in. Use a CPA if you're going to be a travel healthcare provider. You will do things right, you'll sleep better at night, and you will have the comfort of having a certified public accountant handling your taxes that he or she truly understands what it is you're doing. And this is a perfect example. This is way over my head as far as the tax implications, but I would definitely talk to a CPA, your CPA, and say, hey, listen, I'm thinking about investing in an RV. How does that work with my tax-free housing stipend? How do I do this properly and legally? How do I basically have this work so that I'm taking that stipend and, showing that I'm paying for this, for this investment, and how does that affect my taxes and my tax status? You need to ask that question, and I don't have the answer for it here today, but it is something I would urge you to make sure you're doing it the right way. There's a right way and a wrong way, and a good CPA will make sure it's the legal, proper way, and also the best way that might also help you with your taxes and things legally that you're allowed to be able to do by purchasing an asset and having a company use that housing stipend for that purchase of that asset. So do some research on that and ask your CPA. Like I said, I personally think, just to throw this nugget out there, that buying a used RV, again, is the right way to go. I don't care if you're buying a car or buying an RV. I just don't always agree with going out and buying a brand new car. I think it's anybody that's been in the car business will tell you that you should never do that. You should always go out and buy something that's a year or two old at best. If it's something even older, no problem. Let that depreciation have somebody else pay for, whether it's the manufacturer or it's a previous owner that drove that thing off the lot. I mean, it just doesn't make sense, especially on an RV. I get it's kind of a personal thing. It's not like you're just driving a car, but you can make this yours. And I would urge all of you to start off, like I said, with something smaller and potentially, and I would say, do something used so that you have let that appreciation and depreciation, go off to somebody else's amount. So keeping in this episode, which I know is not going to be a hugely long episode because I'm not an RVer. I don't have a lot of knowledge. There's a lot of people in my family that have RVs. I'm not an RVer. I don't know if I'm ever going to become one. It sounds okay to me, but it also sounds like it's expensive, right? If you're driving it around the country and you're actually retired and doing RVing, which a lot of people do, and even my family has done, I think that's a whole different ballgame. But if you're driving to an assignment, parking it, and living out of it, I think that's just a winning attitude. So first and foremost, do your research on the type of RV you're looking for, the brands. I don't know an awful lot, but I do know when I'm researching a car, for example, I research it a lot. And again, I spend a lot of time researching a car that I want to buy, making sure it's really what I want. And lately I've been very, very happy with, I'd say the last probably 15, 20 years, I've been really happy with the cars I bought because they're what I wanted. And I was able to research them and get them exactly the way I wanted to make sure it was a good fit, that it wasn't going to fall apart, that I knew what I was going to be using it for. And for those of you that know me, I've had cars for a long time. I've got one I passed on to my son now, who's going to take it off to college, that I'm really happy to have him around something like that. He's going to be going up and driving through the mountains and through snow. And he's going to have a great vehicle that I bought a long time ago. I've taken good care of because it's lasted and survived. So do some research on the different brands. I would imagine that there's a whole bunch of research and data out there on which ones stay in good shape, which ones fall apart, which ones are problematic, just like there would be for any car. It's going to tell you, and people are really good about rating and ranking these things. And listen to it. If there's a whole bunch of things that say, hey, this is a problem or this is an issue with this one, maybe walk away from them. And even if you love it and it's a perfect fit and you got it for a great price, there could be a reason why you're getting it for that great price. I'm going to talk about this a little bit down the road, but when you're looking at that, there's a big difference between an RV that you're driving and sleeping in it and something that's called like a fifth wheel or something that you're pulling behind. And I'm a big fan of the ones that you pull behind because A, they're oftentimes bigger because there's not a driving compartment in there, so you can get more space for less price because you're not paying for the engine, which is a huge expense on all these things. I don't care if you're talking about a little conversion van or you're talking about a full motor coach that's built on a bus frame. That has a huge amount of expense to it because it is an engine, and everything's being powered through that engine, which means you've got a huge amount of issues that could go wrong. Not only is it the awnings, but you're also talking about the actual engineering and the engine and the vehicle itself is going to have some problems, could have some problems with it. So you've got double the risk, so to speak, on doing it. So I personally would recommend, again, this is coming from a non-RVer, I would recommend jumping on something that you pull behind, and hopefully you already have. Oh, there we go. I always hit that. Hopefully you have a truck or something that is already capable of pulling an RV, and keep that in mind, obviously, with what you're buying. If you don't have something, then realize if you're going to get something that you're going to pull behind, you're probably going to have to switch out your car and make a new car payment and get out of whatever you're driving into something new. So there's a bigger commitment there, and I totally understand and get that. But that's, I guess, kind of part of the big jump into going in an RV. And I don't know if I've said this or not, but I really think this is a good idea. I've always thought this is a good idea of RVing. There's a bunch of things I think are good ideas when it comes to money. This is one of them. I'm going to have an episode coming up. I just have a lot of research to do to prepare for it, because I really like to get a guest on there. But we're going to talk about starting your own LLC and actually having a company pay you through your LLC. I think there's an amazing strategy that makes total sense to starting and forming a corporation. But I'm not ready for that one yet. But this is kind of along that same lines. There are smart things that you can do if you're willing that will save money, let alone all the things we're going to talk about that I think are really, really great perks and advantages to having it. So, that's just one of them. But research. What type, what kind of, first think about how much money you want to spend and what can you get for that money. And like I say, at the very beginning, it could be something, and probably will be something used, and something that you're going to pull behind a truck or a minivan or a sport utility vehicle, or something that has some size to it that can actually pull whatever you're going to have. If it's smaller, you can pull them with cars. Obviously, you guys know that. So it depends upon what you want to do and what kind of investment and really what kind of space and size you want to have for when you're not at that facility. Because I think that's one of the biggest advantages to not only having a stipend go for an investment purchase, but let's really talk about what we really are saying here, and that is there's a huge advantage to having basically your apartment go with you every time you take an assignment. Let's just think about that for a minute. One of the first things you guys do when you accept an assignment is the first thing you're going is, oh gosh, now I got to go find housing. Well, that's eliminated if you have an RV and you have planned for, obviously, this assignment. You know right where you're going. It's already been eliminated, which means now you're going from where am I going to find a place to rent to where am I going to park this thing and what is available as far as an RV park for me to go in and have my RV with me for an assignment. So that I'm not saying it makes it easier, but it should. Instead of dealing with all housing, now you're just dealing with where is it that I can park this thing. And I would imagine that before a seasoned traveler that uses an RV decides where they want to be submitted to through your various companies, you would have already done the research and say, I probably don't want to go there because it's in the middle of nowhere and I've already researched. And it doesn't make sense. There's not any RV parks that are within a on-call distance or what I need to do to drive to and from that facility 3 to 5 times a week. So most of the veteran RVers already know, here's where I can go. You've done the research. So as you're talking to your recruiter or however it is that you find your assignments, you know which ones make sense and which ones don't. So it's wonderful that you've gone from now I have to go find a whole apartment to just where do I park my apartment, basically, the things that I am accustomed to. And that's, I think, one of the biggest advantages to being an RVer as a travel healthcare professional is that you're basically taking a mini house with you that is yours on every single assignment. I'll talk more about that in a second, but here's one of the other big kind of things. I know I'm jumping around a little bit, but here's one of the things that I like personally, and that is if you're a dog or cat or pet fan, you take them with you every single time. As long as you've got, I guess, arrangements made or you have a pet or an animal that is able to be in an RV for 8 hours, 12 hours, or you've got somebody you're traveling with, that makes sense. There is a window of opportunity that is higher, I think, as if you're using your own RV, obviously, for taking your pet along with you, as opposed to having to try to find yet another place, another wrinkle, another piece of your puzzle that allows you to have to sit there and now, find places that are allowed for your pet or your animal. It's important. You guys all know me. If you do, I'm a dog fan. I've got 2 boxers now. I had to put one of my guys down. So I'm down to 2 boxers, which was heartbreaking for me, really heartbreaking for me. But I've got 2 boxers at home. They're knuckleheads, and I love them. And matter of fact, as you guys know, I go between California and Colorado. And it's really important to me now that I have 2 dogs that when I'm out here, I want my dogs with me. So I understand that value and that concept. Traveling in an RV allows you to do whatever. You're in charge. It's your place, right? So I'm just kind of reminding you that make sure that your dog or cat is able to be in some place for 12, 13 hours while you're off to work if you travel alone. You've got the arrangement mates. But if you do, having your pets being able to have a place is going to be less stressful on them. You're not going to be separated from them, which a lot of you guys have. You don't have to fight and stress out about another thing every time you accept an assignment. Well, now I got to make sure I've got a place for my boxer because not everyone wants to take a boxer with them, right? Not every housing will take boxers, for example. My pet situation would make it really difficult for me to be a traveler, especially with 2 of them. If I was traveling alone, it'd almost be impossible for me to be a traveler. So this really does open up some avenues and allow you to be able to have your pet go with you, which I think is a big part of the overall enjoyment for those of you that are pet lovers of being a traveler. I mean, that's part of it, right? You've got maybe 3, 4 typically, or 2 days off a week, which means you're on this great location. You're hopefully in an RV park that, is going to allow pets. You've got great outdoor opportunities with your pet, which I think is remarkable. They get a better life. You have a better life. It just works out really, really well. So it's part of that whole concept like I was talking about. Think about this. How many of you have a couple of huge bins that you put in your car or your SUV every time you take an assignment, which means you've got your linens, you've got your kitchen supplies maybe, you've got your credentials and things you take with you. Have something you have to take with you every single time. It takes up a lot of your space, which leaves less for your clothes, and especially if you're going to a place that's going to have a decent amount of change of seasons over the next 13 to 26 weeks while you're there. More room, and it allows you guys, you're taking your kitchen with you, you're taking your linens with you. It's part of your place. It eliminates that, and it's customized. It's your stuff, which, I mean, again, I can speak from experience. Nothing like coming home from a long shift or working hard and you climb into your own bed with your own sheets on it that were yours. No one else has slept on them. You're not counting on some kind of a service to be able to make sure they're changing your linens for it. It's your stuff, your dishes, everything about it. You can put your ketchup in your refrigerator and not have to throw it away every time you do a 13-week assignment. It's yours. There's little wrinkles of money that, again, this just kind of makes sense. And I hope it does to many of you, because I personally don't know why, if you are a veteran seasoned traveler, why you'd go any other route, except for that maybe you just haven't quite gotten that amount of jingle in your pocket yet to be able to really afford this. But with rates and things like they are right now, I hope that many of you saved your money and made money over the last few years, and this would be a really good investment if you've decided that you're going to continue on with this travel career that you've already started. So it's also this little wrinkle, and again, I'm going all over the place, but it's important to kind of keep it in perspective. Every time you guys go and find housing, you are also trusting that individual that you talked to or that website you found your housing on to be true to what you saw, right? And how many of you have been burned by getting a place and then getting there and going, oh, this is not what I thought? It happens to me. It's happened to all of us, I'm sure. Whether it's an Airbnb or something you're finding, I don't recommend Craigslist, but where you're finding something and you're just saying, okay, here's my money, here's my deposit, here's everything. Please, I hope that this is close to what has been projected on your website or what you've told me about it, the proximity or anything about it. It is difficult, and I know when I look at stuff for Airbnb, it's really hard sometimes to tell what is the overall feel of this place. How close is it? I'm seeing kind of a map, but they don't always tell you exactly where they are. More often than they don't. It's a proximity on a map that you can kind of see where it might be, but you're running that risk. With an RV, it's the same thing. You eliminate, again, another wrinkle of stress of whether or not your housing is going to be up to snuff, because it's yours, so I hope it's up to snuff. If it's not, that's on you, right? You've got to improve your own housing. But all these things start to add up. I know all of what I'm saying, a lot of them seem kind of little and like, but you start adding them all up. It ends up being, I think, a big part of increasing your potential overall satisfaction on any given assignment. If you have a tough work environment. We've talked about that, and we're going to continue to have episodes that are going to cover different aspects of that. We're also going to talk about housing and some complete episodes that are totally about some housing hacks and some things that we think are really easy and great ways to kind of increase your chance of having good housing. But it's a big part of your overall, in my opinion, your overall happiness and enjoyment of any given assignment. And you've just eliminated the potential. Yeah, sure, you could have a great place. You're like, wow, this is way above and beyond my dreams and what I thought it would be. But how often does that happen? More often than not, I would guess you guys would tell me that it's the opposite, where somebody is trying to get you to rent their place, and of course the pictures are old, or it's been a little run down since then, or they're taking it from angles that make it look bigger. They've got the wide angle interior things they put up on real high, and it makes the place look super spacious, and you get there and it's tiny. It eliminates all that unknown, which I think is a big part of potentially ruining an assignment. You can have a great location, a great hospital, a great coworker, a great pay rate, a great agency representing you, but you're having trouble finding housing. It can totally make that whole assignment go completely south. It has nothing to do with the actual assignment. It has to do with the town and what was available, or a potential mistake on a choice that you made. This eliminates that entirely. So a couple things that are on, I guess, to consider. One of them is, remember, if you are going to be an RV traveler, we talked about seasonality on Travel Evolve frequently. I would tell you that I believe if you're going to solely go with an RV, when it comes to certain times of the year, and I'm thinking winter, when it comes to winter months, you may not be able to take full advantage of some of the highest paying positions, which are some of the coldest, least desirable places in the northern part of the country, because you're not going to be able to stop and stay at an RV park because they're probably going to be closed, or if they're open, they're not going to allow for hookups, or who knows what each situation is. But there are going to be some really great assignments that you may want that you're going to have to eliminate because it's February and you can't go to something really high paying up in Montana or up in northern Minnesota or Michigan or upstate New York because you can't take your RV up there. Not only would it be difficult to get through potentially a snowstorm or some inclement weather, but once you got there, there's nothing there. So I understand it does eliminate that a little bit, which means you've got to start looking at different what's the word I'm looking for? Gosh, I can't even think very clearly today. Wrinkles or different aspects of each assignment that create high-paying assignments, and maybe it's not about climate, it's more about, maybe it's a rural town, maybe the hospital has a bad reputation. You may have to find yourself settling for some of those and going on some of those assignments in order to chase some of those dollars that we talk about. And I wouldn't blame you. I've always said that I think my favorite travelers are the ones that say, I can put up with anything for 13 weeks. I'm interested in the money, and I want to be compensated and paid heavily for what it is I'm doing, because I believe wholeheartedly, in case you haven't gotten this from me, that you guys take almost all the risk of having an assignment be what you want it to be, which means that you're in charge of which ones you pick. And if you're doing it for the money and you're RVing, you may have to say, okay, for me, it's not going to be about chasing the climate high-paying ones in the middle of winter in the cold places. I've got to find a different wrinkle and different piece of that puzzle that makes this assignment pay higher. And it's probably going to have more to do with just the overall ruralness or attractiveness of a location. Not everybody, who wants to go to Nevada wants to go to a little tiny town in northern Nevada. They want to go to Vegas, or they may want to go to Reno, but they may not be interested in something small in the state of Nevada because it's going to be hard. This may be a great opportunity for you as an RVing healthcare traveler to say, as long as it's southern enough that it's going to be open, this does make sense, and I can chase some dollars that way. There's still going to be great opportunities, what I'm getting at, for you to be able to chase some dollars, but you just may be eliminating some of the seasonality aspects of it when it comes to chasing some high-paying positions. So if that makes sense. I think RVing overall, if I haven't said this already, is a fantastic lifestyle addition to what is already a great career move. Obviously, I'm a fan of traveling. I think if I was a healthcare professional and I had the ability, I would travel as long as I could. If myself or a partner or my wife were having kids and I wanted to be part of that, which I would, then I would stave that off and hold off, and I'd travel again when those years were over. I just think it's a great opportunity for you guys, and I do believe that having an RV or having an RV lifestyle really, really adds to that overall quality of the assignment, because now it's really about, just think about RV parks. I don't know if you guys have ever been to one or not. And like I said, I've got RVing in my family, and some of them are just absolutely knockout, beautiful places to be. The state oftentimes has cut away certain, areas of the. I know in Colorado, for example, in California here too, both the states that I live in, there are designated wonderful places that the state has said no building. This is a state park. It's an RV park. Some of them are right in the beach in California. Some of the most beautiful places in the mountains in Colorado, or in areas that are just great views of the mountains. And you wouldn't be able to get that in an apartment or an Airbnb, and you guys have that in your backyard. Not to mention the really cool culture that I have found, that most RVers are really friendly, nice people. You don't typically RV and stay in an RV park if you're not a people person and you don't like other people. What are you doing, right? I mean, I'm sure that they exist, but for the most part, RV parks are full of people sitting outside, if the weather's there, sharing a fire, walking around, saying hi, stopping by somebody else's place. You get to know your neighbors, and it can be really cool, even if it's just temporary. And like I said early on, you might find another traveler that's the exact same thing. Now, next thing you know, you guys might have a travel buddy that you're all traveling together. I mean, there's the possibilities are kind of endless when it comes to that. Think about also, I said seasonality. One of the things that I guess is a downside of being a traveler is, like any other kind of housing, there are times in the year when availability is going to get limited. And it could be, of course, like I said, seasonality, but it could be things like festivals and popular times of the year. Sorry, my phone's going off. Popular times of the year where that particular city or county has a lot going on. I know from a lot of my current travelers that are here it is summertime, and a lot of them were on assignments in the spring, early spring, and they've told me their stuff has gone up. And one of them is in an RV, and she said recently, boy, the price of our lot has really increased heavily because it is now part of, it's a much more expensive situation. So it's really, really high paying and really, really expensive because now it is, it's that season where that festival goes on, and it makes it really super expensive. So, things like, I've used Sturgis as my example before. Good luck finding something up there when that's going on. But it could be something that you don't even are aware of. So find out and check it out and understand that there's places that, they've got you for 11 or 12 out of 13 weeks, but there is no availability. You got to move out for this week. So those are things you want to find out about. And I'm sure that veteran RV travelers know that stuff does happen to them. So you get used to this stuff and you start to learn as you're asking and looking for a place. You want to make sure you've got 13 or 26 weeks worth of availability. And again, you'll start getting good at knowing where to take assignments and where you shouldn't. And there are certainly states that are more RV friendly, that have more parks. I think most of them all do. And I think it has to do with, how big the state is, how populated that state is. But there's plenty of things you can look at. But do keep that in mind, that there's going to be some assignments that you really want. It's going to be great, but you have no housing for 2 weeks, and it makes it really difficult, and it's almost a deal breaker for you. If you don't have a place to stay, what are you supposed to do for those 2 weeks? If you can move into a hotel and you think your RV is safe, being there, that's an option. But I have had some people say that it's almost a deal breaker sometimes when I try to find an assignment in a place that has a really popular festival or something seasonal that's going on, which means, and the hospitals usually know this, that it's almost more difficult that time. So I've had to turn down assignments that I actually accepted because I found out afterwards that there's just no viable way for me to have some housing. So research that, and you're going to learn a little bit more about how those festivals and how that seasonality does come into play. So, but let's be honest, you guys are all dealing with places right now in the country where rents are through the roof, things are expensive. There's a lot of people telling me that the availability for temporary or short-term housing is at a premium right now. So it's not like not RVing eliminates that problem just like anything else. It has a lot to do with, again, how much is availability. So only an RVer that really understands this, like I said, with all these groups, will really be able to help and get to it and understand where you want to be. So who knows? I don't know if this is a pro or con. I mentioned how if you are staying in a park and you've got that community feel, but also like anything else, you're going to have, if you're a night shift person, you're going to have people in that RV park that don't understand that are literally your neighbor, that are, making all kinds of noise at different hours of the day. Most times people are pretty considerate, but you never really know what they're going to say or what they're going to do and how they're going to be. So it all has a lot to do with that and what's kind of happening with your RV and how that all goes down into play. Having someone with a different schedule is going to could complicate some things as well. So there's pros and cons to both these things. again, I don't think it's any different than living in an apartment, but being outside and being in an area where people are doing things, and the RV park itself is doing some maintenance could be a little bit of an issue. But I don't think, for me, I don't think it's an awful lot different than what it would be to be living in an Airbnb or an apartment or something along those lines. Certainly a hotel, that when you're trying to sleep at night and everyone else is working during the daytime, it kind of changes some things. So again, like I said, one of the most important things I would recommend is, if you're going to do this, first go on and start researching RV and start asking some questions. And I truly believe this is where Facebook primarily really does shine. A lot of social media, I think, have their purposes, and they're all getting good. And I know Facebook is definitely phasing out for a lot of people, but this is still an area, I think, that if you're able to get on one of these groups, you get some really good information from veteran travelers who can, like I said, help you get through that learning curve faster and without as many mistakes as maybe what they made, if you really start to research and ask these questions. You guys love to help each other. And the only thing I would say is, much like we do a lot here with Travel Evolve, when you get good at being an RVer, help somebody else and help them kind of learn the ropes that you just learned as well. So it's kind of part of that. So last week I was talking a little bit about the company I went to work for out of Cleveland, and I said, this is one of those times where I'm going to tell a lot of you, and there's a lot of people that reach out to me and say, hey, I want to start a company. And for the most part, I'm very supportive of that, because I do believe that there is plenty of room for good companies in our industry. I think a lot of the bad companies, and there are plenty of them out there, need to go away. And unfortunately, they're not going to, because they do things really well, and they've learned how to do this, and they've learned how to attract travelers regardless of what their pay schedules are and their pay rates are. They've learned how to play the game effectively with many of you, or at least with people that maybe don't listen to Travel Evolve, that just kind of go through the motions. What I found interesting on that last thing, and I want to kind of wrap up this little portion of the kind of the pre-frame of what, so you guys know a little bit more about me. And I think it's important as I'm giving you guys advice, I just think it's important to know who's this guy giving me advice and what is his history. What I found with the group out of MRI out of Cleveland was that it's amazing how many people see the numbers in our industry and think, oh my gosh, I'm gonna become a millionaire. This is just easy and great, and it's you're making money off of everyone else. It's not quite that simple. And this is what I also will tell some people that say, I want to jump into traveling. I want to own my own agency. It is complicated. It is a ton of money that has to go out into an AR, accounts receivable, that you are hoping and waiting to get paid on. I think that's the biggest thing that most people don't understand. This company didn't understand it either. As we became successful, I got to tell you, I think we had like 35 people going to work for us, all within, from literally the ground up, within the first 9 or 10 months, which doesn't sound like a lot, and it's not. But 35 people from zero, and having that payroll every week when they didn't have any expenses and then waiting for that money to come in, was confusing to this company. They were like, I don't understand, because every week we're spending more and more money because we were growing, and we're collecting from 6 weeks ago. So they were really looking at the numbers and didn't always understand the thin profit margins, which again, I've always ran 20% deals, and I was running that back then. That I guess nowadays, with things being 30%, they may not have complained as much. But back then, this was a 20% margin company, and I set that margin, which was important to me, and we were able to adhere to it. But it was remarkable to me how a multi-hundred million, many $100 million company was struggling with understanding the concept of all this money having to be put out, waiting to have it come back in, because they weren't used to that. Most people that decide they want to start an agency don't understand the financial stress and strain and the amount of money it's going to take one way or the other in order to have a successful company. You can't have a successful company with 3 or 4 travelers working for you. You just won't. You'll make a buck or two, but it's not going to be enough to start a company. You've got to have 50, 100, 150 people, 200 people, working for you for it to be a success, which means you're talking about millions of dollars out there in an AR at any given point. No matter how good your collections are and how much pressure you put on a facility to pay you fast, you're always going to have more and more money out. Now, if you stabilize at 200, let's say, then the money would come in quicker. But who wants to stabilize? I don't know any company out there that says, we just want to get to 200 travelers and we just want to stay right there. I'm sure they exist. I'm sure there are mom and pop and lifestyle companies out there that love where they're at and are satisfied and happy with their own personal retirement and where this company is going to take them personally. But for most companies that are either, investor or publicly traded, or have a group or a management or multiple, like I said, investors or owners in that company, they're always going to want to see that company grow. which means they're always going to be hopefully going to a point where they're spending almost as much money as they're receiving because their company's growing that fast that they're getting collections from 6 weeks ago, but yet they've got 10 more people, 20 more people working right now than they did 6 weeks ago. So all that money's going to their to their new people that they're getting paid on. So it's a really wild economy. And I found it really interesting with this group that 35 travelers at a 20% margin was a solid revenue stream. But there were people who didn't understand it that were just going, boy, this is a lot of work. And I said, I know, for this amount of money when we have offices that could be pulling in this kind of revenue by just placing a whole bunch of people and getting the permanent placement fee of 20 to 30% of what someone was making. So that was their biggest thing, is they would focus on major six-figure incomes, and they'd be making $30,000 to $50,000 deals like that without any expense up front, which was like 10 travelers back in the day at a 20% margin. It's not so much now. Now it's about 5 travelers. But it was 10 travelers back then, which meant you had to have 10 travelers working for you on an assignment to make that kind of revenue, and you had to pay all of that for 3 months, and then at the end of the time, you'd make your same amount of money. And I found it interesting, but it was a really good lesson for me to know, like I said, that we could literally create an agency out of thin air, which it's not really that difficult, but it's maybe it is. I don't know. It doesn't seem that tough for me. Nowadays, it's a lot harder, I think. Like I said last week, I think it is difficult for the average person who is unknown in this industry just to pick up a phone and say, hey, I want to, partner with this huge vendor management group, even though I have nothing to offer them. I have no experience to show them. I have no history of success that I can say, here's what we've done. And they're going to, decide to go ahead and hand me a contract for hundreds and hundreds of facilities for me to play in. It takes a special salesperson to be able to get that going if you haven't been in this industry for very long. And I think that's another time where I see a lot of new people that want to jump into starting their agency really struggle because they don't have the business acumen that comes from being in a healthcare staffing to know how it is, who to call, who handles what if you're going to be bidding on getting a contract or a system, what is an appropriate bill rate to be asking for that allows you to be competitive, but also is going to allow you to get that contract and be able to fulfill it once you get it. It is just not quite as easy as it used to be. And I've learned recently over the last year, probably about 3 or 4 different people that reached out to me said, that's kind of challenging. It is difficult to, I want to start an agency, but no one knows, XYZ company, and no one knows me, and I'm finding it really difficult to get contracts for my people. It's a real thing. So understand that. And then they obviously have to convince travelers that you have their best intentions in mind and that you're going to provide for them and you're going to kick some butt. So that's a whole different wrinkle. But I think that is easier than it is to go out and get those contracts. So it is what it is. But I found it fascinating back many, many years ago to see for the first time how so many businesses don't understand this. The reason I brought this up today was that, A, I want to kind of continue my story, but B, I want to explain to you why. This is why I believe so many new agencies that jumped in, that came in from outside of this industry, are struggling right now. And they don't understand how to survive during normal, quote unquote, times when margins are dropping, because they have to be competitive. The bill rates are dropping, which means they've got to drop their margins so that it's not, like I said many times, it was hidden how much companies were making when the rates were $200 an hour. Well, now that they're half that and they're $100 an hour-ish on average, let's just say across the country, it's really hard to hide a 30% margin. If you're taking $30 off that $100 bill rate, then how do you hide that? And they're struggling with that. And I think that you're going to see, like I said, a lot of companies disappearing, being bought by other companies, merging with other companies that are saying, I tried this, I made some money, now I'm getting out. And I think that's going to be a normal thing. Just like the traveler aspect, we're doing the exact same thing. A lot of travelers are going to say, hey, this wasn't for me, I'm going to get out. So at any rate, guys, RVing as a traveler, I think it's a really great way to go. I think there's some really big upside, very little downside to this, but you got to research it. You got to make sure you're committed. This is one of those things that you just can't kind of do it. It is a commitment to go out and purchase or to lease an RV. I think you've got to have your ducks in a row. I think you really need to know what you're doing, but I do think if you do all those things, I personally think if you know what you're doing, this can add a huge ton of value, not only actual financial value, but emotional value, satisfaction value, overall travel experience can go through the roof if you know how to RV and you take your RV with you on the road. Guys, I appreciate it, and I will catch you next time on Travel Evolved.